The stadium held 60,000 seats, and every single one of them was empty. The stage crew had been working since 6 in the morning. Nobody had noticed him come in. Michael Jackson was sitting alone in row 12, center section, and he hadn't moved in 40 minutes. April 1992. 40 days before the Dangerous World Tour would open in Munich, Germany, the production was being assembled inside a stadium in Los Angeles for the final weeks of full rehearsal. The stage alone required 11 days to construct. The rigging filled the upper catwalks. The lighting grid covered an area larger than a city block. Outside, the city moved through its ordinary afternoon. Inside, 60,000 empty seats curved in a vast bowl around a stage that was, as of that morning, still becoming. The crew knew Michael was somewhere on the grounds. He had arrived at 8, walked the stage once, spoken briefly to the production director, and then disappeared without telling anyone where he was going. James, a sound technician who had been on the Dangerous Tour production from the first week of setup, was running cable along the stage right catwalk when he looked down and saw him. A figure in a plain black shirt, row 12, center section, completely still. James stood on the catwalk and watched him for almost a full minute before making a decision that would stay with him for the rest of his life. The Dangerous World Tour had been planned as the largest solo touring production in pop history. 69 concerts across 5 continents, an audience of 3.5 million people. A stage production so complex it required its own engineering team separate from the road crew. The album it supported, Dangerous, had been released in November of 1991. In its first week alone, it had sold over 700,000 copies in the United States. But something about the months leading into the tour had a different quality than anything James had worked before. He had been in the touring industry for 11 years by that point. He had worked productions for some of the largest acts in the world. He understood the specific texture of pressure that surrounds a major tour in its final weeks. The controlled panic, the endless problem-solving, the way sleep becomes optional and coffee becomes structural. This was different. The crew around Michael worked with a precision that was not entirely about professionalism. It was about something else, a collective, unspoken awareness that what they were building mattered in a way that was difficult to articulate to anyone who wasn't inside it. James had tried to explain it to his wife on the phone the night before. He had said, "It feels like something important is about to happen." He hadn't been able to say more than that. The day had started in the usual way. Crew call at 6, coffee from the catering truck. The particular low-level, organized chaos of a large production in its final assembly phase. Cables were being run. Monitor positions were being finalized. The drum riser had been repositioned twice already and was about to be repositioned a third time. 2 riggers in the upper catwalks were arguing about a load calculation in voices that bounced off the empty seats. The stadium smelled like concrete and metal, and the particular electric smell of large-scale lighting equipment warming up for the first time. James had been on the stage right catwalk since 7:45, running a secondary cable loop that needed to reach the front-of-house position without crossing 3 other runs on the floor. It was detailed, quiet work. He was good at it. He liked the part of the day before everything became noise. He was about 20 minutes into the cable run when the radio on his belt crackled with a general crew check. He answered it, kept working. A few minutes later, he looked up to check the sight line to the FOH position and stopped. In the audience section, approximately 40 rows back from the stage, center section, row 12. a man in a plain black shirt sitting completely still. The surrounding 60,000 seats entirely empty. James recognized him immediately. His first instinct was to look away, not from discomfort, from the quality of what he was seeing. There was something about the way Michael was sitting that communicated, without any visible signal, that this was not an invitation for interruption. His hands were resting in his lap. His back was not quite against the seat back. His face was tilted very slightly upward toward the stage. James looked at the stage. He looked back at Michael. He looked at the stage again. The stage in its current state was a framework, steel and rigging and cable, half-finished, enormously loud in potential, but silent in actuality. From where Michael was sitting, you could see the whole shape of what it would become. James would think about that later. The fact that Michael had chosen row 12 specifically, not the front row, not the back. Row 12, where you could see the full stage without losing the sense of distance, where the scale of the thing was visible all at once. James finished the section of cable he was running and set it down carefully so it made no noise. He climbed down from the catwalk. He walked across the empty floor of the stadium to the audience section. He found the row. He moved along it until he was 3 seats away from Michael. He sat down. Michael did not turn to look at him. James would say later that he had expected some kind of acknowledgement. Not a conversation. He hadn't gone there to have a conversation. But at minimum, a glance, a nod, the small social signal that registers another person's presence. There was nothing. Michael's gaze remained on the stage. His posture did not change. His hands remained in his lap. His face carried the expression of someone who was not looking at the stage so much as through it, past the steel framework and the rigging and the half-hung lights, toward something that existed in a different register entirely. James had a radio on his belt, a water bottle, and a small notebook he carried for technical annotations. He set the notebook on the seat beside him. He put the water bottle on the floor. He turned the volume on his radio all the way down. Then he looked at the stage too. He would not be able to explain afterward why he did what he did next, which was simply nothing. No greeting, no apology for sitting, no offer of conversation. He sat in the seat, and he looked at the stage, and he was quiet. 3 seats away, Michael Jackson remained completely still. The stadium held its 60,000 empty seats around them both. From somewhere in the upper rigging, a rigger's voice floated down, indistinct, absorbed immediately by the concrete and steel. Then, silence again. Time moved differently in that section of seats. James would try to explain this to people over the years. The quality of the silence in that stadium, in those particular seats, with the stage in front of them and 60,000 empty chairs around them. It was not uncomfortable silence. It was not the silence of 2 people who had run out of things to say. It was something else. The silence of 2 people who had each, independently, decided that the moment didn't require speech. James watched the crew work from his seat. He saw the rigging team complete a cable run on the far side of the stage. He watched 2 stage hands wheel a monitor cabinet into position and adjust it 3 times before leaving it. He watched the empty front row directly below the stage and tried to imagine what those seats would look like in 40 days. He tried to imagine 60,000 people filling the space around him. He found he couldn't. Not completely. He wondered if Michael was doing the same thing. He didn't ask. At some point, a production assistant crossed the floor below them, looked up briefly at the two figures in row 12, and kept walking without stopping. James noted this. The way the crew had absorbed Michael's presence into the ordinary texture of the day, not ignoring him exactly, but treating his stillness as something that belonged there. As if they understood, without being told, that this was part of the work. 53 minutes passed. James knew the exact time because he had looked at his watch when he sat down, and he looked at it again when Michael finally moved. Not dramatically, not in a way that announced itself. Michael took a slow breath, deeper than the ones before, the kind of breath that marks the end of one internal state and the beginning of another. Then he reached forward and picked up the small notebook James had left on the seat beside him. James went very still. Michael held the notebook for a moment, looking at it. He didn't open it. He turned it once in his hands, feeling the cover. Then he set it back down on the seat, carefully, precisely where he had found it. Then he looked at James for the first time. James had been preparing for this moment, or had been telling himself he was preparing for it, for the better part of an hour. He was not prepared for it. The look was not what he had expected. It was not the look of a performer or a celebrity registering the presence of a stranger. It was the look of someone who had been somewhere very far inside themselves and had just come back. Michael said 2 words, just 2. Then he looked back at the stage. James kept those 2 words private for 30 years. He would say that Michael had spoken. He would confirm that it had been 2 words. He would describe the quality of the voice, quiet, unhurried, directed not quite at James, but at the space between them and the stage. He would not repeat what was said. It wasn't a secret, he told an interviewer in 2019 who had tracked him down specifically to ask. It wasn't mine to give away. It was said in a place that wasn't meant to be a stage. What James would describe, in the careful terms he chose every time the subject came up, was what the 2 words had done to him. Not what they meant, their meaning was private, but what they had done. I had worked concerts my whole adult life, he said. I understood stages. I understood the relationship between performers and crowds. I thought I understood the cost of what these people do. He paused for a long time in that interview. I didn't, he said. Not until that afternoon. I understood the performance. I had no idea about the thing underneath the performance. He said Michael spoke those 2 words the way a person speaks when they have forgotten for a moment that they are ever required to be anything other than exactly who they are. He said it was the most human sound he had ever heard from another person. 12 minutes after Michael spoke, James's radio crackled. A crew call. Something about the monitor mix position needing a decision before the afternoon test. He looked at the radio. He looked at Michael, who had not moved since turning back to the stage. James stood. He picked up his notebook from the seat. He picked up his water bottle from the floor. He said nothing. He moved along the row toward the aisle. When he reached the aisle, he stopped. He wasn't sure why, except that something in the moment seemed to require it. He looked back at row 12. Michael was still sitting exactly as he had been for the past hour, back slightly forward from the seat, hands in his lap, face tilted very slightly upward toward the stage. If he was aware that James had left, he gave no sign of it. James walked back across the empty floor of the stadium and up the steps to the stage. He answered the radio call. He solved the monitor problem. He worked through the rest of the afternoon without mentioning what had happened in row 12 to anyone. When he looked back from the stage an hour later, the seats in center section were empty. Michael was gone. The next day, full rehearsals began. James would not see Michael alone, not like that, for the rest of the tour. The Dangerous World Tour opened in Munich on June 27, 1992. It ran for over a year. It crossed Europe, Asia, Australia, Africa, and the Americas. It drew 3.5 million people across 69 sold-out performances. By the time the final date came down, in Mexico City in November of 1993, it had become one of the defining events of Michael Jackson's career. James worked every date. He has described the tour in interviews over the years: the scale of the production, the precision of the crew, the particular quality of concentration that surrounded every show. He has never described the afternoon in row 12 to any journalist who found him, only to one interviewer he trusted, in a conversation that was recorded but never fully broadcast. What he has said, in the partial descriptions that exist, is this: that the two words Michael Jackson spoke in that empty stadium were not addressed to him specifically. They were addressed to the stage, to the 60,000 empty seats, to whatever Michael Jackson saw when he looked at the space that would, in 40 days, be filled with people who needed him to be extraordinary. James said he understood, sitting in row 12, that the extraordinary thing, the thing people paid to witness, began in a moment exactly like that one. Subscribe if this stayed with you. Leave a comment. What do you think those two words were? Share this with someone who understands what it costs to perform at that level.